I'm not really aware that this was a social science term before. I mean, it's basically a metaphor, like a script is something you have in a movie. And I think I like the metaphor very much because it kind of captures what we mean by talking about this without evoking any of the old social science terms that already have a long history of being debated and being understood differently by different people. So I think coming up with a new term that's really useful. But I have not come across this term before, so I'm fascinated to find out about it. So I actually applied in 2018 already, so that was before Scripts came into existence. And I got accepted into the predecessor program of Scripts, that was the BTS, so the graduate school that was around already. And then I postponed that for a year because I wanted to get some work experience. I worked with the United Nations in Brussels. And I think the fascinating thing is that in 2018 I applied without ever knowing that Scripts would come into effect, but my topic is still very much inside the research interest that Scripts was designed to research about. So Scripts is all about populism, globalization, the contestation of the liberal script and what we see as the contestation all over the world right now. And my proposal that I handed in 2018 without ever knowing that this would come into existence was exactly on that. It is on losers of globalization and how they get underrepresented, marginalized in political institutions and systems in the run-up to these backlash events like Trump or Brexit that we've seen in the past couple of years. I started out in Mannheim, German university, pretty standard quantitative political science education. And then for my master's, I went on to Paris and London, and I studied at Sciences Po Paris and the London School of Economics with lots of people from all over the world, liberal, quite progressive, the citizens of nowhere, as Theresa May would have it. So it was actually a very interesting, a very shocking experience when both Brexit and the vote for Donald Trump as US president happened while I was doing my master's in Paris and later on in London, and I could see the repercussions of that, especially during my time in London. And of course this was not only, or me as someone who studied in this place, as lots of people from all over the world, we did not only feel that this is something that attacks our values, being progressive, being liberal, being open-minded, being basically citizen of nowhere. I think that can actually also be a good description. So this is not only targeting our values, but it's also academically puzzling because it puts many questions back on the menu that social science in general might have thought it solved back in the days, like the question of how can free trade and the welfare state be harmonized with one another? How can then they be married? Questions like how does democratic rule, how is that compatible with globalization? So it's not only the more immediate questions like how could that happen? How could someone like Donald Trump with his strong narcissistic personal traits ever become US president? It's also the more academically challenging questions like what does this tell us about the way globalization interacts with the state? How does globalization change the state? How is the state becoming globalized? And I think the good thing about Scripts is that we're trying to answer both these questions, both the more immediate, more practically minded questions like how did that happen and what should we do about it, but also the more academically challenging and the more theoretically entrenched questions. I think the interdisciplinary character, I think that is very important. I mean, for a couple of decades we've seen in the social sciences that we venture into ever more sophisticated subdisciplines, and these subdisciplines have a tendency to shut themselves off from their surroundings. So you come up not only with political economy, but it becomes international political economy, and then you can also out of that create the political economy of central banking, and then that becomes a subdiscipline. I think that does lead to some good results, but it also results in lots of diversity and lots of like a Babylonian a situation where we don't really talk to each other, but we just venture into a ever more sophisticated and ever more specialized subdisciplines. And I think that scripts is consciously set up in a way that this should not happen. That is my number one advantage that I can see about scripts.